Foster Care Nation, listen up.
We have some exciting news to share. We're going to offer up our first ever webinar. If you've ever been curious about what it takes to be a foster parent and help kids in hard places, join us on February 18th at 5 p.m. Central for our free, no-obligation webinar. We're going to share our hard-earned knowledge and experience with anyone who has ever wondered about helping kids from hard places. If you're interested, go to fostercarenation.com and sign up for our newsletter. This is where you can get the details and the links to join us so that you'll be able to ask any questions you have in the question and answer section. Now, I know what you're thinking. Webinar. A free, no-obligation webinar. It sounds like there's a sales pitch at the end. I've listened to a lot of webinars, guys. I know what you're thinking. I don't have anything to sell you. I don't have anything to sell you. I promise I don't have anything to sell you today. But what we are going to do is try and support you and help you join us in our mission to help kids. And if that's what you're interested in, come see us. I promise you, we're not selling anything today. We're just going to offer up our experience, our knowledge, and trying to help some people who are interested in helping kids. As you can tell in the background, I have some kids. They're here, they're noisy, and I'm not even going to try and quiet them down at this time, because I am not going to get that done. They're wound up out there, but you know what? They're happy. And that's what we're looking for. We're just trying to provide a safe place for kids, trying to help them through some of their traumas, some of their things, and make this world a better place. And if you want to join us on that mission, we welcome you to show up February 18th at 5 p.m. Central. Like I said, fostercarenation.com. Sign up for the newsletter, and that's where you'll have all the information come out. Thank you so much.
Foster Care Nation, listen up. This is
Foster Care and Unparalleled Journey.
Strength for the powerless. Courage for the fearful. Hope and healing for wounded hearts. Hello and welcome back to Foster Care, an Unparalleled Journey with Jason
and Amanda.
Today we're talking with the author Robert P.K. Mooney. Rob Mooney has a book called A Foster Kid's Road to Success. And I have heard Rob talk on quite a few podcasts and read through his story. And my gosh, do you have a wildly interesting story that hopefully can help a lot of people here today.
Well, cool. Well, thank you very much. I hope so.
We're glad to have you here, man. I appreciate you showing up and being willing to come out and tell your story here as well. And I also want to make sure that I tell you, we appreciate you sending us a copy of the book for us and for the kids as well, because, man, we've got a lot of kids, and over half of our kids have come through the foster care system. Yeah. And this is the stuff they need to know about. And I can tell them this all day long. And this is the parent perspective problem, is that as dad, there are certain things you're just not going to hear from me because you think you know more than me. And that's what happens with kids. But to have somebody who's walked that road, and this is a podcast, so obviously you're going to have a hard time seeing what's going on here. But Rob's sitting here wearing a shirt that says foster kid right on it because he has that story. He grew up through the foster care system. Rob was also, him and his wife were foster parents as well. So you've got a really unique perspective that most people will not have.
Yeah, I think so. So I started in the foster care system when I was 6 years old. And between the time I was 6 and 18, I changed homes 20 times. When you age out of the foster care system, there isn't a lot that's expected of kids because the statistics are really, really grim. And so what I wanted to do with the Foster Kids Road to Success is help these kids that are likely to age out. Once you've been in the system for a while, you get past 14, it feels like your adoptability kind of drops down. I want these kids to know that there can be a life full of happiness, meaning, and real human connections after they leave the system. When a good chunk of their life, they haven't had those things. So that's the intent of the book. It was written directly to them, foster kid to foster kid, and hopefully it does some good.
I'm sure it will do some good today, because there's a lot of people listening, and you have a perspective that most of us as foster parents don't have, and that's understanding what it's like going through the system. And you went through your own set of traumas as a kid, and that's one of the things that we're just now really getting to in science, is understanding how that trauma really affects a kid. And as I look through your book and listen through some of the stuff that you've talked to on other podcasts and other outlets, man, you had a tough go of it, especially towards the beginning. But I have to say that you have a really unique character quality in you somewhere that had to have been inborn, because I read this story and I heard you talking about this whole like marathon thing. And I'm going to tell you, if you see me run, buddy, you better follow me. There's a bear behind me.
Yeah, right.
Because if I'm running, it's because there's something I can't kill behind me. I'm still not going to go that far. I'm not going to run 26 miles to get away from the bear. But you did that marathon at 6 years old?
Yeah, at 6. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I was, so I lived in Hawaii. I was born in Hawaii. And I saw one Sunday morning just these thousands of people running. And I said to my father, I was like, what are these people running from? You know, I'm not sure if it's like the zombie apocalypse or whatever. People are just running. I didn't know what a marathon was. So he tells me it's a marathon, which meant nothing to me. And I'm like, all right, well, what's a marathon? Because I'm 6, right? Actually, I apologize. I'm 5 at the time. I'm 5 years old. Wow. And so he explains to me that it's a 26-mile race. And my 5-year-old reaction to that was, I can do that. I don't know why, and completely unrealistic. But I was like, yeah, I can do that. And so I convinced my older brother and sister, they were 7 and 9 at the time. And I just said, hey, let's go run this marathon. It turns out it was an annual thing every December. And so we started training. That's about all we knew is that we needed to train. I'd seen the film Rocky, Sylvester Stallone's Rocky, you know, so you got to go, you know, train. And our training regimen consisted of a 3-mile, you know, route, 1.5 miles up the mountain where we lived, and then 1.5 miles back down. That was it. That was it. And it turns out that's like no way to train for a marathon, but I didn't know that. And so what we did sprint like the last 100 yards, because I don't know if you remember, like whenever Rocky was finishing up, he'd always be sprinting at the very end, whether it's sprinting up the stairs, sprinting on the beach, whatever. And so that's what we did. We sprinted, and I always lost because I was 5 and my brother and sister were 7 and 9. And my father kind of, he fancied himself a jogger, and he thought it was cute that his kids thought they could do this. And so he kind of humored us and would run with us for a little bit. But he had some very significant personal issues. And so he soon dropped out, but I kept doing it. I kept training, you know, 1.5 miles up the mountain, 1.5 miles down. So I did that for a year. Sometimes my siblings would go with me. Sometimes my mom would drive the station wagon behind to make sure I was safe. Other times she was too sick to come along. And so I just did it on my own. And a year later, when I was 6, race day came along and ran the marathon with my older brother and my older sister. And my father, it was funny. The night before the race, my mom was gone way past dark, which was not like her at all. And I was worried, where in the world is where's my mom? Because she's usually not out this late. And she shows up way past the time I should be going to bed, because we got to wake up at like 4:00 in the morning to get to the start of the race early in the morning in downtown Honolulu. And the reason she was out is because she was out getting us matching uniforms. You know, some red runner shorts, white tube socks with red stripes along the top, and these white shirts with a foam lettering that said Mooney Bunch on it. And that's where she was. And my father was like, oh my gosh, I said I'd run this race. Holy crap. And so that's what it was. You know, we went and we ran that race. And Yeah, it's crazy because there's a 6-year-old has no business running a marathon, especially not a 6-year-old who had ever run like 3 miles. We did push-ups and sit-ups and those sorts of things, the things that you did in the 80s to get in shape. And anyway, but yeah, so we ran and everyone towered over me because there isn't a 6-year-old division, right? There's just adults all over the place, and the gun goes off. And we all start running, and I've got to take 2.5 steps for every step of my father's. And soon my 10-year-old and 8-year-old siblings outpace me, and me, my 6-year-old little malnourished body just kept plugging along, and 3 miles turned into 5, turned into 10, 15. And it was mile 20 when my body, told myself what my brain wouldn't, right? And that was, kid, you're done. You're done. This is ridiculous. And my body seized up. I don't know if you've ever gotten any cramps that are like serious, deep, deep cramps, but my hamstrings, my quads, my calves, all completely seized up. And I literally ate the pavement and just crash and burn. And by that time in the race, there were enough, it was long enough. I wasn't setting any records, right? So you
were in the 6-year-old division.
Yeah, I was actually. Anyway, they started letting traffic through, and this rusty brown, pickup truck with a couple local boys came in. They see this little kid just, crying on the side of the road. It's like, hey, kid, you want to ride? And my father stood up, and he was like, 20 miles is really good. Let's call it a day. And I just said, no, I think I'm going to finish. For about 20 minutes before these guys came by, my father held me on his lap and just rubbed my legs, just kind of bent my legs, back and forth, rubbed out the knots in my hamstrings and my quads so that I could start moving them again. I couldn't move them. I couldn't extend my leg. I couldn't, retract my leg either which way just because of the pain was so bad. But after about 20 minutes, 25 minutes of him just manually forcing them open and closed and rubbing them open and closed, I got to the point where I could move them on my own again. And that's when these local boys came in their truck to ask if I wanted to ride. And my response to them was, no, I think I'll finish. So I stood up and I just kept running. And I seriously, I don't know why. And I can't say that I really know that kid. But I'm grateful that he did, because when I was 100 yards away from the finish line, I started sprinting. My father, who hadn't been training with me, completely forgot that's what I did. And I left him behind. And so in the book, there's a picture of me crossing the finish line, and you'll see, my father. I think you can see my father in the background trying to catch up at the end. And it's kind of interesting. I don't know if you know what leis are, but in Hawaii, they make these flowers, flower necklaces, right? These leis.
Right.
As I was finishing, I wasn't so far into the race that people around the finish line were gone, right? There were still lots of spectators and finishers. I wasn't the last person to finish. There were about 50 people that finished behind me. But as I was coming and finishing this race, these people see this little kid, and literally people crying, and I'm not understanding why, came and just put these leis over me. So as I'm trying to finish this race, and people are, what the freak are you guys doing? I don't know. And I'm just
You're
running.
trying to have your Rocky moment.
Yeah, exactly. But I crossed the finish line, and in the book, you'll see a picture. I've got these leis that are far too big for a 6-year-old, because these were adults who saw this and put it on. And so I finished the race, and I was the youngest person to ever finish it at 6 years old. And I share that story with the kids who read my book, the youth that read my book. And it's under a chapter of know that you can do it. Know you can do it. And the reason I share that, it's a principle they have to know, because they know, they've been told the statistics are stacked against them. They know that a huge chunk of them that age out, they're going to be homeless instantly. And by the time they're 24, most of them will have experienced homelessness, incarceration, pregnancies, all these sorts of things that lead to difficult life events and make it difficult to lead a successful and happy life. Those are all things that are the realities for these kids that age out. Nevertheless, I tell them, you got to know you can do hard things. Why could I, as a 6-year-old, do that? And the reality is I was able to do it because I didn't know that I couldn't, right?
Yeah.
There was no reason for me to think I couldn't do that. I had no idea how long 1 mile was, let alone how long 26 miles were. And so even though the odds were horribly stacked against me, I didn't know that I couldn't do it. And so I need these kids to know, I need them to know that you can do it regardless if the odds are against you, regardless if other people tell you that you can't do it, they need to know you can. Whatever your it is, they need to know that they can do it, whatever it is. And so I encourage the kids to find their it, quote unquote, it, whatever it may be, college, a profession in the arts, some sort of gainful employment, a family, whatever their it is. I need them to know and believe to their core that they can do it. Because if a 6-year-old with no training, no realistic training, can finish a marathon, they can do something like have a family, have meaningful human connection, whatever the case may be. So that's why I share that story in the first chapter of the book.
Hey there, Foster Care Nation. We'd like to take a quick minute to step out of the podcast here and ask you guys for a little bit of support. If you could share an episode with people, friends, in a group, with family, anywhere where there's somebody who would like to hear this. Also, if you'd like to join us and support our mission, a couple dollars a month would be really helpful. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/fostercarenation. Now back to the show.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful picture of sometimes it comes down to just being dumb enough to not know that you can, or maybe it's just not believing everybody else who tells you can't.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure people told me that a 6-year-old, a 5-year-old has no business doing that. And thankfully, I promptly ignored them or forgot about it. And so I tell these kids, don't let anyone tell you you can't. If someone does, and then inevitably they will, ignore them. Forget about it, especially if that person is you. If you tell yourself, I can't do it, you know what? You don't know what you're talking about. You can do it. Ignore yourself and move forward.
So now you walk through, after that, you walk through a lot of trauma and struggles as a kid going up into the teenage years, and I read through some of the struggles you had with your dad, because I think we all had some struggles with our dad, right? I mean, in full disclosure, me and my dad were really close. We got along great. We still had our fair share of struggles. And my dad was a good dude. My dad was the police officer who showed up at your house when Children's Division called for help, right? That was the guy who showed up was my dad, but we still had our fair share of struggles.
Sure.
And you walk through a lot of problems with that. And man, at that age, you had been in care already for a while, right?
No. So that was actually 2 months before we went into care for the first time. And so my family of origin, we had 7 full biological siblings. I was the third of those 7. My mother, her 2 children from her first marriage, lived with us until as soon as they could get out of Dodge, they took off because it wasn't a great situation. So as adults, they took off as quickly as they could. 2 children from my father's first marriage stayed with his first wife. I didn't see them much. But there was a lot of issues there, a lot of mental health issues, both on my mother's side and my father's side, led to a lot of neglect and a lot of abuse, physical abuse that's left, emotional scars for sure, and physical scars as well. One of the things I try to help these kids understand is that they do have a power to choose. And the biggest thing they get to choose is their own identity. As we learn about the effect of childhood trauma and how much it can affect a growing child's brain, we look at their ACE scores is something that a lot of people in the system are familiar with. Adverse childhood experiences, and you get ranked on a scale of 0 to 10. 10 being just more trauma than you should be experiencing, for sure, and what it can do. Me and my siblings, my older siblings anyway, so my sister, my brother, and I, we all scored at 9 on the ACE scale.
Wow.
And that leaves a scar, and as a result, you feel like your path is dictated. You feel like you can only be reactionary with that kind of trauma. But what I try to help kids understand is they can choose whatever they want. They still have that ability to choose. Sometimes you have to go and choose to get help to fully unlock your power of choice. But they've got to choose that first and foremost, that their own identity. I have a scar across my cheek. It's faded over time. You can't see it. It's quite deep, an impression that comes across my face. I don't know if you can see that, through the camera, but comes across my face, and it's as a result of my father's beating. He kicked me across, down the hall, and I cut my face on something on the hall, and that's left a gash, a physical reminder of what happened. And every day I see that it's there, and I'm shaving every morning. It's there. My razor goes across it, and it could be a token of my victimhood. I choose for it not to be. I choose for it to just be there. It's part of me. It's part of my story, but it never got to define me. And I got to choose who I was going to be. Now, I didn't figure that out for myself until I was, an older teenager. But thankfully, I figured it out, because some of these kids, they never figure that out. Their victimhood is their entire reality, and they choose for that to be what defines them. And it's very, very difficult to be an agent of success for yourself if you have let the abuse, the trauma, the neglect, just the difficulty of moving from home to home be your reality, to be your identity, and let all of your actions be mere reactions from what you went through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, you mentioned in the book that you had moved to Utah at one point, which
Yes.
I'm not an expert on either Hawaii or Utah, but I don't think you need to be to know that that's got to be a culture shift.
Huge. It sucked. I mean, listen, Utah's home now, right? I remember when I moved on my 8th birthday. It was happy birthday. You're moving to Utah. My mother was originally from Utah, and before she died, I'd been in state's care for a couple of years. And before she died, she asked the state to move her children to Utah with the hopes of perhaps her family being an influence or the like. And so we moved to the state, moved us to Utah. She died, 8 months later. Is when she passed away, and then we just kind of bounced around there. And when I was 16, it was my 16th birthday, and I realized I'd been in Utah for half of my life. It was like sobering. It's like I've been in Utah. Like, Utah is home now. Hawaii, I can't really claim that. I've been here longer, and that was a big deal for me. Big deal for me. But I've grown to love it. So I've had opportunities to go other places, and I've chosen to come back to Utah. So it was a big shock, huge shock, weather shock. First time seeing snow blew my mind. But it's home now.
Well, I asked that question because a lot of kids deal with an interracial placements as far as the foster placement or adoptive placements. And it's kind of a similar thing, right? Because people are completely different, I'm going to assume, in Hawaii than what you're going to meet in Utah.
Yes, actually, no, that's exactly right. And I don't share this experience in my book. Again, my book's not intended to be a memoir. It's just, here are these principles, kids, that you need to apply in your life, and here's how I learned them. But yeah, when I got to Utah, my first placement, kids in Hawaii speak differently than they do on the mainland. We speak, there's the South, they've got their, kind of own dialect, right? In Hawaii, the kids, especially, lower income, actually it's everybody, speaks in a bit of a tongue called Pidgin, right? It's a mixture of Hawaiian and English. And people on the mainland thought it was quite uncouth. And so my foster parents, every time they caught me speaking pigeon, they whack me, they slap me across the face to encourage me to not speak pigeon, like a dog who you peed inside. You just whatever was the thought. And so I got whacked around by my foster parents because of that cultural difference. That we don't speak that way. We don't speak that way when you're speaking with a strange dialect using a slang that they're not used to. There was a substantial culture shock there.
Well, I bet. And, of course, I don't know what the rules were in 1980 something or 1990 something, but I'm assuming they probably weren't supposed to be smacking you around.
No, probably not so much. I had some amazing foster parents, absolutely amazing. And my book is one of the first on the dedication page. I'm dedicating it to the amazing people who took me and my siblings in. Because we were a lot to handle. Nevertheless, I do understand that there are some that are less suited for dealing with these kids from hard places, and as a result, there is sometimes, unfortunately, additional abuse or trauma that comes in the system. I think that's getting less and less, but there's a number of places where that still happens.
I sure hope it's getting less and less. It's one of the things that always just kills me to hear these horrible stories. I troll a lot of Facebook groups and stuff looking for stories and people who want to talk. And I see a lot of these stories of kids who were in foster care or adoption who were in some pretty horrible places.
Yeah.
And if you go back a ways, I believe we have an episode, it was with Heather Marie, I think. But she talks about some of the absolute trauma that she dealt with, physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse in foster homes after having come out of a traumatic home life as well.
Yeah. I had one that's when they found out I had written this book, right? Someone reached out to me and did this very public mea culpa. I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I wonder if this person thought like I was using my book to out people, which was not the case at all. And I was a little embarrassed that chose to do this very public form for the whole world to see. I am so sorry. I wish I would have treated you better. And my knee-jerk reaction was not what I did. I didn't do this, but I thought it'd be really funny to respond to it and say, oh, don't even worry about it. Remember that time you locked my room and I punched my fist through the door and I climbed out the window and you chased me on your bike and I went running down, got to my best friend's house, jumped over a fence. They let me in, locked the door behind you, kicked the door down to come after me. Remember how those were good times. No. Good people. There were so many people. I mean, just think about it. Just the act of being able to open your heart, open your home to kids who frequently don't have a place in either people's hearts or their homes. It's huge. My hat goes off to foster parents everywhere. And I'm grateful for the many people who took me and my siblings in over the years. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's been a journey that we have definitely we have benefited a lot from some of those tough situations kids came out of and gave us some wisdom and experiences to learn from. Now, you mentioned earlier that you lost your mother at a young age. What was she sick or what was going on there?
Yeah, she was very sick. It was ultimately cancer and complications related to the treatments of cancer and non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. But she was very unhealthy for a good chunk of her adult life. Both mentally and physically. And so as a child, she, when I was a child, she was frequently bedridden. But she was still my mother, and it was a very, very difficult thing. In fact, I would say for a good chunk of my childhood, I blamed the system on her death. I viewed someone, I think I'd heard once that stress can help cause cancer. I was like, what greater stress would there be than a mother who viewed it as her life's mission to have children? She truly did. She had an insane number of pregnancies and miscarriages, and 10 made it to life. And that was like her calling. I mean, to put in perspective, when we were first placed in care, we weren't we didn't immediately go to foster care. Rather, we went to a battered women and children's shelter. And because she was a battered wife and we were battered children, and she was finally convinced to leave my father. And she tried a couple of times. In fact, she actually moved us to the mainland when I was 5. And then he convinced her to bring us all back, and we came back and continued on. That happens, battered wife syndrome, battered partner syndrome, a little bit going on. But so finally they convinced her to take us to the police came and picked us up. We went to the battered women and children's shelter, and she was convinced to join us there. Well, within a couple of weeks, the caseworkers there, they're like, oh, this woman, she has her own issues and she cannot take care of these kids. And so that's when we're put in state's custody. And as you know, when cases open and kids are in custody, parents have limited contact ability. And that was brutal for her. So what did she do? She found out where I went to school, the new school that I was going to, and she would come visit me at recess. And that's a major no-no. You're not allowed to do that, even in 1984. And so what was her response? All right, well, if I can't go visit him at recess on school property, then she would come and be outside of the fence. And I would see her in a, rental car where she was over there, just dying for that connection with her child. And me as a 6-year-old dying for that connection with my mother, and just to hold her hand through the fence. That was the kind of contact she went, do whatever she could. Now that got her banned from visits for an extended period of time. She got in trouble for that, but that's how difficult losing her children was to her. And so when I learned that stress can contribute to cancer, I was really angry, and I was like, oh man, the state, they're the reason why my mother died, which wasn't the case. But it was tough.
Hey there, Foster Care Nation. If you'd like to find yourself in a group with like-minded people, head over to Facebook, and you can find us at facebook.com/groups/fostercareuj. We've got a group over there where we talk about foster care, we talk about adoption, and we talk about all the things related. If your podcast player allows it, you can also reach down and hit that subscribe button so you get notified every week when we put up uploads. Every Tuesday, a new episode comes out. We'd love to see you next week. Now back to the show.
It was tough. So yeah, that was it. It was tough for all of my siblings. It was, I would say, especially traumatic for me in a way, because the state had decided that they were going to send us back. So we'd been in foster care for 2 years, and now we're going to start going back. And because there were 7 of us, they said, we're just going to send them back one at a time. And I was the one to go back first. And I went for a weekend visit to kind of acclimate with them, came back, and then the next week went to go move back for good. And then she died the next day. And so I was there at the hospital. Still a tough experience for a little kid to lose his parents, lose his mother, especially in the situation where we came from, where I did not view her as the perpetrator of my pain.
Wow. Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a real tough one to work through for a young kid, especially. My own father lost his dad at about the same age. I think he was 7 when his dad passed away from cancer as well. And so I know that can be a real struggle for kids. Did you feel like that really contributed to some of your struggles as you grew up and you got older? You were placing that blame in other places, and the pain from having lost your mom, was that a part of your problem, not learning how to deal with that? Because I'm assuming that at 7 years old, you probably didn't have a healthy view of that.
No, that's right. So yes, that contributed. Now, here's the interesting thing that foster parents need to understand is, even though if you come from a background that sucks, there's no food, there's no supervision. When the supervision's there, you're getting beat up. Even from those circumstances, you still want to be there. And that's really hard for foster parents to really understand. It's like, why would you want to be in that sort of an environment? But we wanted to be there. I wanted to be with my siblings. I wanted to be with my father and my mother. And so my father helped perpetrate the idea that our family was a victim of the system. In fact, I was actually just 2 weeks ago, I was at dinner with my oldest sister's, my older sister who's in foster care, her last foster home. We reconnected through Facebook and we went to dinner. And they had said that, man, we had a hard time really understanding why you were in foster care in the first place, not realizing how bad it was there, because my father did such a good job of helping the kids understand that our family were being victimized. And so we wanted to be back together, And so with my mom dying, and with this fantasy that we were all victims of the state. That led to a lot of anger, a lot of rebellious type activity, and it wasn't until I was a bit older when I had an opportunity to leave foster care inappropriately, and then go back to be with my father as an older kid. So his rights were terminated when I was 9. And so all my siblings then were now free to be placed for adoption. And the 4 younger ones were all adopted into 3 different homes. And so 2 younger brothers, 2 younger sisters. The girls were adopted together and the boys were adopted into separate homes. And so they gained some form of permanency, whereas me, my older brother, my older sister, the ones that ran the marathon, we continued to bounce around in the system. When my older brother was 16, he kind of fell off the grid from the system. He's one of those lost boys because he went to go live with our father, who then by that time had moved to Utah, but was several hundred miles to the south in southern Utah near St. George area, by Zion National Park. He had a borrowed trailer up there in the mountains, and he was just out there living with them, kind of. And I reconnected with him when I was 13. My foster parents at the time encouraged me to reconnect because he was the link to my Native American ancestry. He's Native American and he's biracial. And he was the connection there. They encouraged me to reunite. We did. And then they were having struggles of their own. And so rather than involve the state into a decision on what I should be doing with my life at 13 turning 14, they sanctioned me to go back and live with my father. Also not approved, but you hear of these kids that are like off the, where the system doesn't know where they are for a while. That was me living with him up in the mountains outside of Hurricane, Utah. And it wasn't a good situation. It wasn't a good situation at all. And I was grateful for the opportunity to be there, because then with a little bit better perspective as a 14-year-old, not great perspective, but better than a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, I could see how bad it sucked to not have food, to not have heat, to not have a stable environment with supervision and the like. And so I could recognize for myself that, oh yeah, we left for good reason. We left for good reason. And so that helped me get that understanding. But it also, I had one of those moments that what I call a watershed moment, that where it really could have gone all sorts of bad or all sorts of good. And that's when I was living up in the mountains out there. So again, my father had a borrowed trailer in a place called Apple Valley. It was in the middle of nowhere, 15 miles outside of this little town called Hurricane. And it was just dust, really. Some trailers, some homes on the side of the freeway on the way to Colorado City. And it wasn't great. He spent most of his time at his wife's trailer. She lived down in the valley, 15, 20 miles away. And he spent most of his time with her. And so it was just me and my brother. So 14-year-old and 16-year-old, just kind of fending for ourselves. Again, no heat. People think of southern Utah, that it's super warm. Not up in the mountains. It's not. We got snow. It freezes at night. And we did have a coal stove that wouldn't last the night. So my brother and I would trade off, putting coal into the stove to try to get some warmth in the trailer. but it wasn't great. And then my father dropped this bomb on me one day. We're driving home up the mountain in a borrowed car. And he said to me, Robert, I think it's time for us to bring your younger siblings home. And I was like, what did you say? It's like, we need to bring them home. And at this time, my brother, just younger than me, he was already adopted. I have no idea how he thought he was going to, quote unquote, bring him home. And the other three were in the homes that would adopt them very shortly. So they had permanent homes. They had lives. They had futures. We didn't have jack. And he wanted to bring them to this. And so as politely as I could, I told him that was a really stupid idea. And he didn't like that, not coming from a 14-year-old punk. And so he started to argue. He wanted to know how I felt that way. And it got heated. His anger started to flare, his temper started to go, and so did mine. And it finally culminated in this confrontation where we get to the trailer. I get out, I go in the front door. He follows me in there. It goes into the front, just inside the front door of the trailer. And he says, just very heated, why do you think I don't beat you and your brother anymore? And my instant response, because I had no mind mouth filter at the time, was because we're bigger than you. And it was true that I was taller than he was. He was 5'9". By that time I was already 5'11". Finished up just under 6'1". My older brother, he was already 6'1" at 16. And so we were both taller than he was. And I understand now that there's a difference between a active 14-year-old athletic sort of kid and a full-grown man, but I didn't really understand that at the time. And so my response was, you don't beat us because we're bigger than you. And so he, using some choice language and words, challenged me to make it physical, because I think he had in his mind, his warped mind, that if I hit him first, somehow he'd be justified or something like that. And so I was about to. I don't think I'd ever backed down from a fight previously. And I was about to clock him. And then just time stood still for me. And a thought came completely unbidden to my mind that said, you are about to hit your father. And for a moment, I realized I didn't have to. He was literally telling me to. Everything in my being told me I should. All the anger, all the rage. He would have deserved it. You know, like I said, my siblings and I have literal scars on our body. Maybe it'd be pretty good to give them a little bit back. And so even though he was literally telling me to do it, he was asking for it in a very literal way. And I truly wanted to, deep in my soul, I realized I didn't have to. I had a choice. I could choose to walk to the back of the trailer where my room was. I could kick him in the nuts. I could turn around and walk away. I had options. I didn't have to do what my reactive, traumatized self told me I had to do. And I chose to turn around and walk away. I walked out of the trailer, went about a half mile or so to a friend that had a telephone, and called the police. And, you know, I was back in state's custody after that. And that moment ended up being the entire difference for me, when I realized for the first time that I got to choose. I got to decide not what kind of crappy situation I was in, but I got to decide how I would react to my situation. I didn't have to do what everyone else was telling me I had to do. I didn't have to do what I felt was the only thing I could do. No, I got to choose. And that's made all the difference. And that's the second chapter of the book. After I tell the kids, you can do it, whatever it is, I tell them, you have to know that you have the power to choose. And if you don't believe that you have the power to choose, then the book's worthless. If you believe you're just a product of all the crap that's happened to you, then it's worthless. You need to realize that you can be an agent of action as opposed to merely a reaction for other people to act upon. And I'm grateful, as bad as it sucked being down there when I was 14. I'm really grateful for it. A lot of bad stuff happened down there, and I could have branched into all sorts of different roads. My brother certainly did. And, but I'm grateful for it. If for no other reason, I had that watershed moment where I could understand for the first time in my life that I got to choose.
That's one of the more powerful things that we learn in this life, is that we get to choose whether or not we're a product of our history or whether or not we're going to write that history intentionally. It's our ability to be intentional about it that is really an ability that we own if we choose.
Yeah, that's right. My editor, she was like, Rob, don't these principles apply to everybody? And I was like, yeah, they do. They absolutely do. But I wanted to write a book that was directly to foster kids, foster kid to foster kid.
I know another principle in the book that you talked about was fiercely guarding that ability to choose.
Yeah. Yes.
I love that idea. Is, being intentional about guarding that choice, that ability to make a choice, so that you're not giving it away, and you're not just, what's the old, I think it's an old song from Rush. Don't worry, I'm not going to start singing, baby.
Good.
She always gets nervous. But it's the song, I think Tom Sawyer. If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice, right?
Yep.
And a lot of times we feel like that if you just step back and let life happen, then you're not responsible because life happened to you, rather than realizing that choosing, you chose a road.
That's right.
You chose chaos instead of trying to figure out your own intentionality there. So what taught you that was the next step of it?
Yeah. So I saw a handful of sad realities, right? I saw what drugs and alcohol specifically were doing to people from my background. And every kid needs some sort of coping mechanism. And one of the things that is so readily out there, and when you've been traumatized, and just by being in the system, is to be traumatized for these kids. Just the act of being removed from what you knew to be home. Even if nothing else had happened beforehand, of course, something else did. That's why you're being removed. But even if nothing else happened, there's trauma there. And the desire, when you feel that kind of pain, is to find a way to not feel it. And drugs and alcohol and other mind-numbing substances, they're so attractive so that you don't have to feel that pain. For a period of time, you can feel something else. And so I realized when I had this watershed moment and I got to choose, I needed to make sure I could make those choices. And so drugs and alcohol, I realized they weren't for me. And I had siblings who full-fledged into expressing their demons through there, and they paid for it through their life. Thankfully, and I'm not here to say that I never did anything like that, because I did. But there was a conscious decision to step away from it and to not have that be a part of my life. I mean, my kids love the fact when I tell them that I started smoking when I was 8 years old. You smoked when you were 8 years old? Because they don't see that. They can't imagine me, who I don't drink alcohol. I don't use drugs. They're like, you smoked when you were 8. That's awesome. But no, it was, I just made a choice that I needed to do that. And in the book, I do share a horrific cautionary tale. And that's about my little brother who was adopted. He had opportunities for stability, but he just couldn't get past the pain. And he turned to drugs and alcohol. When he was into the partying lifestyle, we were adults. He had moved back to Hawaii, and he got really heavy in the party scene. 6 months into it, he said to me, he called me up and said, Rob, here's what I'm doing. Some horrifically dangerous lifestyle choices. And he's like, Rob, I got to get out of here. Can you help me? And my wife and I were like, yeah, sure. We don't have much cash, but we'll see what we can do. We got him a one-way ticket out of Hawaii to come with us to Utah. And we helped him figure out how to get an apartment, get an education, started with a community college that had open enrollment, just get going with his life. And I just said to him, I said, hey, buddy, if you turn your life around right now, years from now, you're just going to look back and you're going to say, that was a stupid 6 months of my life. That's going to be it. You got to turn around and you got to start doing this, and you're making the right choices, getting into school and starting to progress. That's the right way to go. And that was actually the night before I took the law school admission test. And so I'm up late at night talking with my little brother, trying to help him. And finally, about midnight or so, I'm like, dude, I got to go to bed. I got a test in the morning. It's really important. And so I go take the LSAT, thoroughly distracted. And when I come home, he's packed up. And I'm like, what are you doing, dude? Because we don't have your apartment yet, or what's going on? He's like, I'm going back to Hawaii. It's like, what? Somehow he'd scrounged enough cash to get a one-way ticket back to Hawaii. And I said, what are you doing? What are you doing? And he said, if I just, party up for another year and a half, then I'll look back and I'll say that was just a dumb 2 years of my life. And the plan was to sow the wild oats for another year and a half, round it out to a nice even 2, and then turn his life around. The problem is, addictions don't work that way. And he was, in and out of some really tough places, hit rock bottom, tried to improve for a little bit, hit rock bottom, until finally the drugs took his life. And when he was 37 years old, he never got that education started, never held down a job for more than a few months. He's a good kid, a talented kid, very talented musician, but got a bad batch of meth. Not that there's good batches of meth, but there are some that are worse than others. And, 2 weeks later, we found his body in his apartment. And that was super sad. About a year and a half or so before he died, he and I were at lunch together, and we were just talking, and he talked about life, how bad it sucked, growing up, and how life had changed. At that time I had 4 kids and had a really successful legal career, and he was kind of spinning his wheels. And he said, Robert, the reason why I've struggled so hard with drugs and alcohol is because of the abuse we had, and because I just never got along with my adopted father. And I kind of stared at him. I had this awkward silence for about 30 seconds. I just kind of looked him down. And he realized, like, oh, and my choices too. Like, yeah, dude, your choices, right? We had the same sort of crap that went down. You got adopted. I ended up bouncing around to 20 homes. You got out at like move number 8 or something. But it's your choices, buddy. You got to choose to do differently. And he just never could. Instead of turning his life around at 6 months, he had an opportunity. He had a choice to do that. He didn't take that off ramp. And it's a lot harder to take that off ramp, 2 years later, 15 years later, and 20 years later. And ultimately he couldn't. And it took his life. And so when I tell these kids that you need to fiercely guard your ability to choose, I tell them, listen, maybe these other kids can screw around with, getting high, wasted, drunk, whatever on the weekends, but they don't have the cards stacked against them like you do. That's not for you. It's not for you. You may be able to go get hammered and then turn it away. You might not. You may be a genetic fledgling alcoholic, and chances are you've had that modeled for you growing up, of easing pain and trauma, with substances. That can't be you. You've got to make the choice to not have it be a part of your life. And if you're already doing it, no problem. You can turn away from it, but you've got to choose right now to use the resources available to you as a foster child. You've got those resources to turn away from it. You got to do it. You do it now, and then fiercely guard that ability to choose, because it's the most valuable thing you have.
Absolutely. That's so powerful.
Yeah. The loss of, somebody losing their life because of that is just such a tragedy, because they didn't believe that they had that choice. It's on some level usually.
Yeah, that's right.
I know that's one of the pictures that I saw in your book that really, really struck me. There's a picture there of I believe it's his memorial and a sister's as well.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. My older sister, she took her own life. As I said, we all have to find ways to cope. and she developed multiple personality disorder. I call it dissociative personality disorder these days. But yeah, multiple personalities. And at age 20, she took her own life.
Wow.
And so their final, they share a grave plot together.
So I have to ask, I mean, you have one sibling who had such a rough psychological disorder who took her own life, and another sibling who fell off into addiction and ended up losing his life to that. What is it about your journey that convinced you to instead become a father, a lawyer, a successful guy, and then reach out to help other kids behind you who said, look, I paved the way, follow me? You know, what is it about you? What's the thing that puts you on that trajectory?
Yeah, it really is that watershed moment, that understanding truly to my core that I get to choose. So if you would have looked at my grades, so that was my freshman year in high school. If you would have looked at my grades for quarter 1, 2, and 3, you would have said, there's no way this kid's going to college. There's no way. That's not the trajectory that he's on. I had that experience, and literally overnight, I start thinking, like, well, if I want to choose to not have, to live in a hole like this, I've got to get an education. I've got to do that. And so that probably means I got to get better grades. I literally, the very next term, got straight A's for the first time. And I didn't get any smarter. I didn't get greater capacity. I just started doing the work, right? I started, all right, I got to turn in my assignments. So let's turn in the assignments. As I started doing the assignments, I started to understand the material. And so I started testing better. And when I didn't understand something, I made the choice to go get help. And it turns out there are a lot of people, we feel like we're alone. Loneliness is almost a universal feeling that foster kids have. But it's a fiction. We're not alone. There are people there, but you have to exercise your power to choose to ask for help so frequently. And so there are people that would explain to me, all right, well, this is how this, principle of math works, or history, or whatever the case may be. So I started doing my assignments. I started seeking help. And as a result, I ended up doing better in school. And again, no difference in capacity. It was just a matter of actually turning in my assignments, and learning the material, showing up for the tests, being, a little more respectful of other people and their time, and their energies. And so there's a massive turnaround really with that watershed moment. And so the difference between me and my siblings, and then my older brother, he in and out of jail, struggled his whole life. My younger brother got adopted, a different brother. He was this close to spending 16 years in prison for assaulting some officers. Similar issues. I mean, these things follow generationally. So you got to make a choice. You have to understand you can choose. And I choose to not be a victim. I choose to be a master of my own fate. And so that truly is the major difference between me and my siblings, was understanding to my core that I got to choose. And that made all the difference. Now, other people stepped in and helped. There were angels all along the way. Foster parents, you guys frequently are those angels. And so for me, if I were to say the second thing next to my understanding my ability to choose, that made a difference was my last foster home. It's at 15, I'm living with my best friend's family. They, let me stay at their place for a bit. And I realized that, oh crap, I'm aging out of the system, right? I'm not going to have a family to call my own. So I made a choice that someday I'd make my own family, right? I'd have wife, kids, hopefully, and that would be my family. And I kind of got on one of my buddies who, as teenage boys do from time to time, a bunch of guys were complaining about their families. Oh, my sister, she's such a yada, yada, yada. My mom, such a whatever, right? And they end up being this little, little circle cuss of guys just, complain about their families. And it bugged me. It bugged me because I didn't have that. And so I told my buddy, I said, hey, man, it really bugged me that you guys were just sitting there complaining about your families. I didn't do it to the whole group. I didn't have the courage for that, but I did tell one of them. And I said, that kind of blows because you guys have the one thing that I want. The one thing that I want. And bless his heart, his response was, well, Rob, if you want a family, ask God, he can give you one. What? I said, no, seriously, ask God, he can give you a family. Never had I ever kind of contemplated that. And it's a very fascinating story on how that all shook out. I do see the hand of providence in my life. Ultimately, I ended up the summer before my senior year with the place that my kids call Grandma and Grandpa. They were those angels that were around us. They had one of the things that were key about them being so special is so often as a foster kid, you feel like you're a trespasser. You're in someone else's environment. They have they've got biological kids. They're quote unquote their own kids. And the kids have my mom and my dad. And you feel like you're just a trespasser there, not a place to call your own. Even if you're legally free for adoption, you're not necessarily a permanent fixture there. And you feel that difference. You don't look like them. I'm a multiracial kid. If you're with a white family or a black family, I don't fit in anywhere. And so you look different and you feel like you're a trespasser. One thing that my last foster family had that was so incredibly helpful for me is I had two nieces. When I moved in, my foster brother was on his way to medical school. He was in medical school. And he had two daughters, a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old. And they loved me. So I'm just going to be a senior in high school. And I was instantly that cool uncle. And they never knew life without Uncle Rob, right? It was never, my grandma, my grandpa, you know what I mean? It was just part of the family. Uncle Rob was the fixture when you came home for Christmas break. When my brother came home for Christmas break, medical school, the kids were there. Hey, where's our friend Rob? Where's Rob to play with? And truthfully, those two little girls helped me feel like I belonged. And that feeling of belonging was really, really important. They also had an adopted daughter. So they had their 3 biological kids, and they had an adopted daughter who, like me, was multiracial. And if she could fit in, and she had difficulties in her own way, her own identity issues, but if she could be viewed as a valued member of their family, I knew that I could as well. And so that was something that absolutely helped. And so even though I was never adopted and I aged out of the system, I was never the placement was truly intended to be a springboard into adult living. It was a favor to my social worker, who was actually their next door neighbor. She was like, hey, will you please take this kid, kind of springboard him into adult living? And they agreed. And so it was never intended to be a permanent home. Nevertheless, it became that over the years, actually, even after I aged out. And those foster parents made just a huge difference. And my nieces made a huge difference. In fact, today, as we've been talking, I'm getting pinged that the oldest of those girls, she just had her first baby. And my family text is lighting up, as the pictures of the new baby girl are coming out. I haven't seen it yet because I've got the video on my computer, so I'm excited to see that. So, but my oldest niece, who is mentioned in the book, my 2 oldest nieces that are mentioned in the book, they made a huge difference to me because they never knew life without me. And for them, I was always there.
Do they have any idea the impact that they had on you?
Yeah, they do. Both of them cried when I talked about them in the book. There's actually a picture in the book of me and my nieces, and it's actually one of my favorite pictures that I own, and it actually helps. It actually kind of underscores why they were so important to me. And so it's a picture of me me holding my two nieces in a beanbag, right? And one of them sees the camera. She smiles because she's a little bit of a ham, but she's still, snuggled into me. The other one, not liking the camera, she's just pulling right back into me for safety, as though I was like a protector figure for them. And so anyway, yeah, both of them told me that they cried a lot because, of course, I got their permission to use their names and to use to put a picture of them in the book. So they know that they mean the world to me. And the nieces and nephews that followed, same situation. Love them all to death.
I find that to be one of those interesting things. We've got a godson who comes around a lot, and it's funny. I've got teenagers in my house, and teenagers aren't always known to be terribly into the family stuff, right? And when our little godson Scotty shows up, and he is between 6 and 7 months right now, so he's still a little guy.
Yeah,
and it's funny at such a little guy, my 15-year-old son will come home from, football or whatever. I've actually had him come home still in pads, the big bad football player mentality, walks in the room and he sees the baby. And it's funny how it seems to melt the hearts of just about everyone.
Yeah.
The first thing out of his mouth is, "Oh, can I hold him?" And I just smile because I know that's always seems to be such a beneficial thing for whatever reason. Everybody loves babies.
Well, so again, with these kids from hard places, we're missing human connection. We've had human connection that's been faulty, that's been toxic, and or has been severed, right? So there is a need for that human connection. And for me, my nieces, did that. My sister, my foster sister, ended up being that human connection where you could belong. And it's vitally important. One of the things that I tell foster parents is that to underscore the good that they can do. I'm not sure if this is the same way in every state, but in our state, when you're getting licensed, they have a questionnaire, right? Among all the tons of paperwork to do, but they have a questionnaire of what you'd be willing to accept into your home, right? What kind of trauma, what kind of background, kids that, have been sexually abused, are they sexually reactive, all these different things, right? And my wife was the driving force for us to be foster parents. I wasn't pushing it at all, but she felt like we could do some good there, and especially with my background. And so as she's going through that list and seeing all these different things, the baggage that foster kids come from, she's like, oh, shoot. And so I'm probably not willing to do this. Probably not willing to do this. I could do this. I could handle this. Probably not willing to do this. And I said to her, as she was finishing up, I said, honey, I'm not wanting to change your mind on any of this, but you do realize that the way you filled that out would have disqualified you from being a foster parent to me. And she's like, oh, that's a good point. So even these kids who have ACE scores of 7, 8, 9, 10, who've been through some really, really crappy stuff, they can still turn out to be very, very, very meaningful parts of families, meaning, very, very productive members of society. And so when I talk to foster parents that are in training, I do caution them. I just say, hey, listen, before you start knocking off things that you can't accept into your life, you don't think you'd be able to handle it. Now understand that, a bunch of those lists, you would have been saying no to me. And not that I'm, all that or whatever, but I know that my foster family, they're really, really grateful that they said yes to their next door neighbor to take in this, very, very troubled, senior in high school, because these kids, that every last one of them have potential to have real meaningful human connection. And so notwithstanding the crap that they've been through, and you have to be careful, you have to be smart. There's no question about that. But notwithstanding all the crap that they've been through, you foster parents have an opportunity to make a very real, meaningful difference in these kids' lives, to have that meaningful connection that otherwise they may be deprived of.
Yeah. Yeah, we have the same questionnaire we filled out as well. So I know what you're talking about. I think that's probably a federal deal. But I did have one other quick question. I'm a member of a dad's group that if you listen to the podcast for 5 minutes, you'll hear me talk about it. And one of the things that I found though, in these moments of talking to other dads and men who've been through their own bucket of stuff in life, is that the father wound runs so deep and it's almost ubiquitous. It's just so common. How does that played out in your life? And have you and your father found a way to reconcile that difference over the years?
Yeah. So one of the benefits of understanding that you get to choose is that I get to choose, like I said, whether I'm going to be a victim or not. And I'm not going to let all this history victimize me. And so I was absolutely willing to have a relationship with my father going on. There had to be some boundaries. I remember he called me when I was in college and said, "Hey, I want to let you know I got married." I was like, "Oh, that's great. When did you get divorced? Because last time I knew you were, on your third wife, right?" And so I want you to meet her. All right, yeah, no problem. And so when I go to meet her, she was a lovely, lovely woman. And but she started kind of going at me. My father was talking to some of my buddies in the dorms. And she started going at me. She's like, it's a real tragedy what happened to your family, kind of going on what we talked about earlier on, that we are these victims. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean by that. She's like, well, it was just kind of a conspiracy for the state to take you away. So basically she was reciting everything my father had fed her years later, right? This is years after his rights had been terminated, years after his children had been adopted. His oldest daughter had already committed suicide. Or in that family, I guess he had a daughter from a previous marriage, so the crap had happened, right? And years had gone by. And that was still the story that he was telling to his new wife. And I was stable enough in who I was and the relationship. I just said, that's not true. It was a good reason we were taken away. And she pushed back. She's like, no, it really wasn't. And so I just said to my father, I called my name, said, "Hey, tell your wife how I got this scar." And his response was like, "Oh, well, you remember, I didn't really kick you down the hall. More, I kind of lifted you off the ground with my foot." And so you remember, right? It was ironclad. It was the first time his wife had seen this. And so they probably had some hard discussions and stuff. And he had to kind of own up to who he had been. But I was okay with that, so long as we understood each other, we could go and have a relationship. It wouldn't be the kind of father-son relationship that you want, because that's really forged when a child needs that protection, needs that guidance. And if you don't have that, then you don't end up having that kind of forge, but you can have a relationship. And so for a number of years, we did have a bit of a relationship. When my kids came into the picture, it changed a little bit, a lot bit actually, because then I make a choice to, whether I'm going to protect my children from certain things. And so we don't have much of a relationship now. And truthfully, actually, when my oldest was born, I kind of had kind of a triggering event, like this kind of reliving trauma all over again. All right, I'm already at this point a fairly successful person. I'm married. I have a degree in finance. I'm heading to law school, right? So I'm on the track, right? But then my son was born. And I had just this incredible love and devotion to this child, and realized I would do anything. I would do anything for my son. And then I realized that my father wouldn't or couldn't. And it hurt. Like, again, it's like, oh man, he must not have felt like I do for this kid towards me. Or if he did, he felt that other things were more important. And it was hard. That was a hard thing. But nevertheless, like I said, you get to choose. You say, all right, I recognize that. And listen, I need grace given to me for my kids all the time. I will be happy to dish out grace to other people because I need it for my kids. And so it was cool. So we were cool with each other. But there was some interactions that weren't healthy for the kids. So that isn't a continuous ongoing relationship. And I feel bad that I don't feel bad about it because I think I should feel bad about it. But the reality is those kids are so much more important to me. because that relationship, the way it was supposed to be, is what I have with my kids. My kids are my world. I love them to death. My greatest memories in my life, the most treasured memories I have, are one-on-one times with my kids. Family vacations with everyone is great, but I'm like the stereotypical dad. Why is dad always pissed off? Because I'm hurting 5 kids, and you guys are range from adults down to a 1-year-old, and this sucks. But when it's just us one-on-one, it's awesome. Maybe 2-on-1, it's awesome.
It's amazing what we will do for our kids, and it's also amazing the boundaries we will put in place for our kids.
That's right.
You're like, this might have been okay for me to accept in my life, but you're not going to do it in front of my kids.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And when you're as an adult and you can maintain your own boundaries and your own sense of self, so long as you can do that, then you can have a relationship even with someone who's less healthy. But your children have a harder time with that, and
children, they internalize, and even if it's not their fault, they like to think that it is.
Oh, so much so. Yeah, so much so. Yeah, absolutely.
And I think what you're showing there is the ability to break that generational cycle, because that happens so often, where you see somebody who's an abuser, it might be an interesting study. I don't know about your particular case, your dad's situation, but it would be interesting to maybe know a bit about his childhood and see if he's not just perpetuating what he knew and what he grew with. And
Sure.
If that's the case, that's the generational cycle that you're breaking.
That's right. And again, I know it sounds like a broken record, but you have to choose to do that. You have to recognize it. And again, that doesn't mean that, everything's all, roses and cheerfulness and all that. No, it doesn't mean that. Trauma takes its toll. It's real. It's real. And so I tell these kids, listen, you go get the help that you need to go break those cycles. Now, go deal with the traumatic experiences in your life. I've used those as a kid, being forced to go into therapy, and as an adult, as a fully functioning, very, very strong, career-oriented, top of my game in my field kind of guy. Yeah, I'm gonna go work on that, because it's important to me that I don't pass that stuff on to my kids. So yeah, I tell kids all the time, listen, I hated therapy. I hated the fact that I had to go to therapy on a weekly and a monthly basis. I felt stigmatized by it. I just hate it. And I have a completely different view. And so if I can pass on to the foster kids how awesome it can be to get some good, solid trauma-based therapy to break those cycles, you do take advantage of that. And there's absolutely no shame in it. I didn't learn that lesson until a little bit later on. I literally failed a full semester of college, because I was ashamed to ask for help a little bit later on. Even after, learning these lessons, the ability to choose and everything, I developed I was diagnosed as hypercyclic bipolar, hypercyclic manic depression. My second year of college, I always had sleep issues, but it got really, really bad, like crazy bad. I would sleep, maybe 1 to 2 hours a night for several weeks in a row, where I just couldn't shut my brain. I just couldn't shut up the voices in my head. It just wouldn't stop. And so I would just get so tired, and then I'd crash, because your body can't do that, right? Go on no sleep. The longest I went with 0 sleep, I woke up Monday morning at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I wasn't able to fall asleep until Thursday at 10 o'clock at night, 10:30 at night. And I felt like I was going to go insane. My body is screaming for sleep, but I couldn't until finally your body crashes. And then I would be out for no real social interaction, sleeping for 20 to 22 hours a day. You can't do college that way, right?
Yeah.
So I'd have these cycles where at the beginning of my wake portion of the cycle, I'm super productive. I catch up as much as I can. And then when you get to like the second week of no sleep, you're still awake, but things you're looking through a glass darkly, and everything's foggy. And it gets to the point where it just hurts just to keep your eyes open. And especially because you're trying to pretend to everyone that there's nothing wrong. And that takes its toll. and then you crash again. And by the time I was on my third crash during the semester, I failed everything. I completely failed an entire semester. And it was, my parents, my foster parents, like, the place, my last foster home, I was living away, but they knew something was wrong. There was enough contact that they knew something was wrong. Didn't know that much. And they were afterwards, they're like, "What are you, an idiot? Why didn't you ask for help?" Right. And, it's just stupid. You get some help. And so I went and got some help, and it was a hard thing for me to, for them to say, "Listen, Rob, there's something broken with your brain. And listen, given your background and your family genetics, it's not surprising, but it's okay. Would you be ashamed?" This is what the doctor said. "Would you be ashamed if you had diabetes to take some insulin? Would you be ashamed of getting a cast on if your leg was broken? So don't be ashamed of taking medication to help, manage these cycles." And it helped me change that stigma. I do share that with the kids as well. When I talk about education, I was not a stellar student, and I literally failed a full semester of college, and yet nevertheless was able to get a solid education for my family. That's important to tell. My son in college just had a rough semester, and he was really bugged, and he has not read my book. And so I did tell him, I said, "Remember, I started high school with these grades, boom, 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 not great grades. And then I failed an entire semester of college. So don't worry, buddy. It's not the end of the world."
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, man, it's great to have you on here today and to tell your story and show these kids that man, there's tough stuff in their past, but that doesn't mean the future is bleak.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Anything I can do to help kids really to see that and then to feel that is what I'm trying to do. So I appreciate
think that's the important part, is feeling it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I appreciate everything you guys are doing. I love what you're doing, and I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. It's our advantage here to have somebody like you to give these kinds of stories and this kind of wisdom to kids who otherwise might not find these kind of things, because it's not really out there very much. So thanks a lot for spending your time and your energy trying to help kids.
Yep. You got it. Thanks so much, guys.
Okay, Foster Care Nation, thank you for listening to Rob's story. Now take his knowledge and wisdom to heart so that you can create love and healing in your family and community. Be sure to come back next week. We have a new episode every Tuesday. If you'd like to share your story as a guest, you can catch us at fostercareuj@gmail.com. You can connect with other like-minded people on Facebook at facebook.com/groups/fostercareuj. Don't forget, we have a Patreon where you can support our mission for as little as $5 a month. It's at patreon.com/fostercarenation. The links to everything are in the show notes or on your podcast player, or you can find them at fostercarenation.com. And as always,
you are so super awesome. I think you guys are so cool.